Hello. My name is Matt Kistler. It's good to be here with you again today. 2 weeks ago, Kevin continued our journey through the book of Acts. He covered chapter 6, which you could see through the lens of expansion in this way. The understanding the church had around who the church was really was still being shaped. There was still this idea of the most, hey, he is welcome to participate. I am all good with children. I was saying something. Acts 6 was talking about how, there was this idea that following the Jewish law, being more Jewish, still had carried a bit of weight, still a bit of importance. And it came to light through this issue of feeding widows. And there was just a sense of unfairness. And the expansion was that the church is bigger than that. The Christ and God are bigger than this understanding of what they understood God to be before, which was the God of Abraham. And so there was an expansion around even the Hellenistic Jews, the Jewish people who were more Greek in their style, in their language, they're welcome too. And we're going to see through the rest of Acts how that expansion continues. But I'm going into chapter 7. And chapter 7, if you're familiar with the story, picks up on the character of Stephen. Stephen was introduced in chapter 6 as one of the new deacons, one of the helpers within the church. And he was accused of crimes against the Jewish faith. And he was facing a group of religious leaders. That was kind of the very ending of chapter 6. And chapter 7 is spent sharing a story about the Israelite people. And spoiler, if you don't know, it makes people angry, and then he gets killed when the leaders stone him to death. And there's a lot of different sermons you could preach around that, around martyrdom, around kind of God, kind of the history of the Jewish people. But what I want to focus on, what really has caught my attention, was the story that Stephen told. Because I think it's very easy to see that story as just like, oh yeah, this is the story of the Jewish people. But he included some things, he excluded other things, he emphasized some pieces, and he drew his own conclusions. So he told a very unique story for a very specific purpose. And that struck me because I was thinking about how we tell ourselves stories and how it is those stories that shape so much of our life. And so that's where we're going to that's the shape of today. I'm going to start with Acts 7 just as an overview, but then jump into this element of the stories we tell ourselves. So to start, I want you to think about a phrase that you commonly use to describe yourself to yourself. So when you are the one asking, who am I? What do you say? For example, are you the one that's always trying, or I never give up, or I can't trust anyone, or I'm always alone? Take a minute just to think about this. We're going to, if you want to write it down, we're going to come back to this later. So just take a moment. What is a phrase that you commonly use to describe yourself? Okay. So keep that in mind. We're going to get back to that. Back to chapter 7. There's a lot in chapter 7. The audio version in the NIV takes 9 minutes. So I would be reading for quite a while. So we're going to not have the Cliff Notes, but the Matt's Notes version of this chapter. My wife often says one of my superpowers is like condensing and summarizing things. So we're going to put that to use. Stephen is asked by the high priest if the charges against him are true. That's where we start. And the charges were, he speaks against the law and he speaks against the temple. And so what does he do? He gives a little flex and recounts the entire history of the Israelites, because clearly the religious leaders don't know it. So here we go. This is the history according to Stephen. He starts with Abraham, a man given a promise. The promise was that he would have land and a family, even though that family would not get the land for 400 years and would have to suffer along the way. So despite that promise not sounding very great, Abraham was faithful to circumcise his son, and that was kind of his part of the bargain, according to Stephen. Now, story skips ahead. Abraham's grandson Jacob and his 12 sons. 11 of them sell Joseph, the 12th, into slavery out of jealousy. But God was with Joseph as he went to Egypt, and going to Egypt was part of God's promise to Abraham. God provided for the whole family of Jacob by Joseph finding favor in the eyes of Pharaoh. We're already at verse 17. Fast forward 400 years. Lots of Israelites still in slavery. They were oppressed, just as God told Abraham. Moses is born, taken in by Pharaoh, and then as an adult tries to lead the people of Israel by killing an Egyptian. That didn't work. So they reject him. He leaves for 40 years when finally God speaks to Moses saying, I have come to set my people free. Verse 35, we're moving along. Moses comes back. Now he does become the ruler due to the power that God is moving through him. Moses promises that God will raise another prophet like him in the future, Jesus. But in the end, the people refuse to obey God or Moses, and they reject the promise given to Abraham and want to go back to Egypt and turn to other gods. Then, in verse 44, it talks about the tabernacle, and there's kind of a shift from the people to the places. So the tabernacle, again, is the tent that the Israelite people used to worship before the temple. And Stephen talks about how the tabernacle embodied God's presence as the people conquered the promised land, and that tabernacle continued until it was replaced by a temple. But the temple was kind of a false idol. It got in the way of connecting with God. So that's the story that Stephen gives of the Jewish history. And then he concludes with verse 51. You stiff-necked people. He's really going for hearts and minds here. Your hearts and ears are still uncircumcised, just like the people who weren't faithful, because Abraham was faithful to circumcise. Being uncircumcised is being unfaithful. You are just like your ancestors. You always resist the Holy Spirit. Was there ever a prophet your ancestors did not persecute? They even killed those who predicted the coming of the righteous one. And now you have betrayed and murdered him, and you have received the law that was you who have received the law that was given through angels, but have not obeyed it. So, to summarize chapter 7, or to summarize kind of that whole story, God gave the people of Abraham a promise. Over and over again, a faithful few were faithful to the promise, but a lot of people rejected it and rejected God. Stephen is saying, you say I'm talking bad about the temple and the law, but Christ was one of the faithful few. You represent the faithless masses. Bold move. So recognize that while we read through this, like I said, this can just feel like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. This is the book of Genesis. This is the Old Testament. This is the story we know. But this story is pretty unique to Stephen, the way he tells it. There's lots of characters that are cut out. There's no Joshua, David, Nehemiah, the prophets. They're barely mentioned or excluded entirely. the choices of what to include or exclude, what to emphasize, what conclusions he draws, those are all personal to Stephen. They're not objectively the only way he could have told that story. Think about what are some of the other ways he could have told the story. He could have changed his main theme from a few people are faithful but not you to God is always faithful and is faithful now by sending Jesus. He could have said the law is fulfilled by Jesus, not broken by it. He could have focused on the temple and its history and how Jesus is the temple and the foundation. He could have told the story so many different ways. And I don't know, he probably would have gotten killed no matter what. But the story he told was not the one and only story that there is. And I think that's something that is so true in our life. That the stories we tell about ourselves, about others, and about God entirely impact and even govern how we experience the world. Let me give you an example. I have two co-workers. I'm going to call them Larry and Joe. Neither of them are named Larry or Joe. But I interact with them a lot. And they do not like each other. They have a history. They work together and did not get along. And so whenever I meet with Larry, they're always talking about the things Joe has said recently and how Joe's against them and is trying to undermine them and is just working against their best interest. Kind of in the genre of the story, they're picking up stones. And the same vice versa. The other one says, oh, this person's unreliable, this person can't be trusted, this person is over-emotional. You know, they both just really have these stories in their minds about who the other is. And they have stones in their hands, ready to throw. And it's so interesting to me because when I see them, I see something very different. I see the goodwill they have. I see the heart that they have for our organization. I see their willingness to give so much of themselves. But they're locked in to this story about each other. And I think that's just a little, kind of gives you a taste of something that goes on at such a deep level. And I want to think about that personally. Oh, there's another another slide that I skipped. This was the summary slide. This one in my mind had some animations, but they disappeared because it's hard to translate the animation. So we're going to have to imagine these one at a time and not quite so crazy. We have grace for each other here. So thinking about your story, my story, I think about how I could tell myself a different story about myself and how that would change my life. For example, I could easily tell myself the story that Matt is the one who squanders so much ability. Matt is the lazy one who does mediocre work. Matt is the shy one with no real friends because he's too fearful or socially awkward. Or Matt is the one who played it safe, never took a chance, and ended up settling for mediocrity. Those are all stories I could tell about myself, and I hear them. But think about the other side. That's what the bold words over top of those other words. They were supposed to come on in and go right over on top of them. To me, the story could also be, Matt is the one blessed from the first day of his life. Matt is the one who's had a connection to God. God who knows Matt and has always been with him. A sense, Matt is the one with an identity, rooted and established. Matt is the one taken on adventures in faith. Matt is the one beloved. The arc of that story is one of hope and possibility, one of gratitude, one of purpose, community, and joy. And think about how those different stories would impact how I interact with the people around me. If I'm the one who plays it safe and never take a chance, how am I going to interact with my highly talented children, right, who don't live up to my expectations? I'm going to be living out my story onto them. If I'm the one who's lazy in my mind, how am I going to act with my coworker when I see them doing less work than me? Right? This shapes our lens that we use with the world. So all of these stories are then embedded into something even bigger. Wow, that color does not work. I'm sorry. On the inside, we have the story about yourself. That impacts the story about others. And around all of that is the story we tell about God. If the story is God is angry and needs you to toe the line, how does that shape your story about yourself? Or God is distant, so you need to get his attention with the transformative work you do. Or God is a lie, a distraction. How would these stories impact your story or the stories you tell about others? Compare that to the story that I believe, the story I hear conveyed through the Bible. It says, all was made right by a good and holy God, but creation was given a choice to pursue independence and self. The identity gifted to humanity by God has been hidden and warped by forces that lead to death. God faithfully has pursued creation, entering creation as a human who overcame death and initiated the complete healing of all that is. And in the end, his return will begin an era when all will be restored to the fullness and the goodness, and the sign of this is love. Whenever we see love, we know that this is God at work. When we tell ourselves this beautiful story of God, we can understand ourselves as their beloved. And we can give others space and grace to escape the negative story boxes, the stones that we want to pick up when they don't fit our paradigm. When we understand our story as ones who are loved, as ones who are saved, as ones who are free, as ones who have hope for a world that is yet to come, we have the opportunity to live life completely differently. And on top of that, something that really stood out to me this morning is when we recognize that our story isn't the only reality, it allows us to understand people better. It allows us to give them grace. This quote, I just really blew my mind, and I thought, this is exactly what I'm trying to say. This is by R.J. Starr, who I don't know from anybody, but I really like this quote. Most people assume they are responding to reality. In practice, they're responding to the narrative structure, the story, that interprets reality for them. You're responding to the story. Human beings do not simply experience events like robots. We organize them. We connect them into themes. We assign motive and continuity and meaning. We take what happens right here and put it into a story that makes sense in our minds. Over time, these interpretations solidify and create our identity. We start calling ourselves the responsible one, the overlooked one, the outsider, the failure, the strong one. And these statements can feel observational, meaning it can feel like this is the truth. I am that way. But all they are are conclusions of our story. It's just the next step in a story we've been telling ourselves. And those stories people tell themselves are not just ornaments. They're not the garland on the tree. They are governing. They guide us. They completely control us. And I think if there's one thing that I want us to hear and let sink in, is that the stories we told ourselves are just stories. There can be other stories. The story we first come to might not be the truth. And in fact, the more we think it is the one and only truth, the more likely we might be wrong. The tighter we grasp on it, the more it kind of falls through our hands. I found this idea so true. As I interact with people, I see how the events are interpreted differently. I mean, you could take all day. How can driving in the same traffic for one person just flip them out, right? It's like they lose it. And someone else is singing their songs and, what's happening? There are so many instances where, the cashier at the store, one person is just irate, exactly. They're just going crazy because it's not going fast enough, or it's whatever. They double-checked something. And the next person is like, hey, can I pay for your groceries? I want to pay it forward, right? Like, people are living in different worlds with the same things happening. What causes that? To me, it's the story. It's the story you're telling yourself about how things are, the way things should be, and trying to reconcile that story box to what's happening around you. So, this leads us to some work to do if we want to really take this in. It's hard to to recognize this and not say, wait a second, what are my stories? Why did I lose it with my wife the other day? Why does my son's baseball game just make me so miserable? Yesterday, I literally walked home from a baseball game because I was like, I'm not having any fun. Steph's like, leave. Part of it is, Nathaniel, I have been to maybe 15 baseball games since April 26th, and we have lost every single one of them. I am over it. Anyway, there's a whole complex there, right? So, once you start thinking about this, what is it in me? It's not about the situation. It's not about the people. It's like I could say, oh, Nathaniel's the problem because he's not playing hard enough, and I need to make him practice every day for 5 hours, right? That's what part of me wants to do. That's right there. I am right there. And then I look at him, and he's like, hey, can I play some video games? And I'm like, do you not care? Do you not realize you're losing? It's like, I've been tracking your batting average for the last 3 weeks. It's been going down. Your hard hit percentage. He doesn't care. He's like, hey, I'm going to be a major leaguer. No, you're not. I'm going to crush your dreams because you're not good. Anyway. This is just yesterday, right? This is how our lives work. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves, and it frees us. Tracy was saying the question she asks and people struggle with the most in her coaching, and I think it's such a great question, is what is another story you can tell, right? What is another thought? Because we often just go with that first thought, and we go and we go and we go, and the reason they said this is they don't like me. They don't like me because of that thing that happened. And why don't they like me? I shouldn't have had to do that thing, and I'm not going to do this now. And, you go down this road, and you could have just rewind all the way back and say, why did that happen? Because they didn't sleep last night? Because they forgot their ham sandwich at home? Who knows? There are so many reasons that we don't know, but we fill in all those blanks with our story. So, our homework. Think about that phrase from the beginning. And this is something that you can be doing now. You can be doing it throughout the week. I think this is such a powerful exercise to just integrate into your spiritual life. Does this story affirm what I know God says about me? Right? We sang that song last week about, belovedness. Are we ready to take on that story of being beloved over and above erasing the stories of the shame, of the brokenness, of even the self-righteousness, right? Are we ready to take on that story instead? And then, is there a story somewhere in your life? And I think the beauty is, we have so many stories going on at the same time. The beauty is, there is the power to override, to overwrite, to delete and rewrite the stories. And I have seen God do that in my life over and over again. That is one of the greatest pieces of the good news, is that there is a better story. I love the verse, his banner over us is love. Think about this story over us is love. You are known, you are loved, you have value, you reflect the living God. You have been saved from the brokenness that you feel. You can run now. You can live out the fullness of the kingdom that is coming, that good, beautiful kingdom. The Spirit is in you. You can do it. That is the beautiful story that we can be a part of, and over time kind of rewire our thinking so that we're governed with that lens. So, Dave, maybe you could come and play a little background story music, because we got a little time here. I want us to go back to that phrase that we wrote and pray over that. Think about, what is God saying about this story? And if you want to come forward and pray, not because there's magic pixie ducks up here, but sometimes moving helps us embody that. If you want an elder to pray for you, we are here available. But let's just take a little time to reflect on this and reflect on some of the stories that we tell about ourselves.